Good morning, Ms. Dornburg.
Good morning.
I need to say this because sometimes when we were working late on cases, and it's late at night and it's dark outside and the people not in Des Moines wanted to leave, I always remember Justice Larson saying, "This is the one we've been waiting for." When we got to the last case. So, without trying to lessen you being the last one, because I don't think it makes a difference, we're ready for your opening remarks.
Well, I wasn't going to say this, but I might as well. My husband always said he saved the best for last.
Jerry, Justice Larson didn't say that a lot.
And I'm mindful that it is the last, and I was happy to be the last because that means that there's at least one thing about me that you're all going to love, and that is I'm the last. When I look at the bench, I see that there are only 4 chairs. There are 3 missing chairs. And that breaks my heart to bring us to this place. And I know that if you chose me and the governor chose me to fill one of those empty chairs, I would bring something to this court that would be different. I know that when the 3 chairs are filled by whomever they are filled by, it will be a different court than it has been before. But what makes it different if I were there is the path that has brought me to this chair, which is unusual. It is not the path that most people have come to see you today or this week. My path started out in the tiny little Minnesota town of Wheaton, the home of the world's largest mallard. And I was the first National Merit Scholar to graduate from Wheaton High School. And that was wonderful because it got me a free ride to Gustavus Adolphus College during a very politically active time. During the same time that I was doing that, I was working as a legal secretary in the law firm of Winter, Lundquist, Sherwood, and Peterson. And those 2 experiences blended together because as I was at Gustavus and there was a lot of political activism going on, I thought, I really am not interested in doing the politics. There's a lot of radical stuff going on, and I'm not comfortable with that myself. And on the other hand, I was working in a law firm, and I watched the guys walking around and doing all this stuff, and I was thinking, I could do that. So I decided to go to law school. A way for me to do public service, but not be in the rough and tumble of politics. Now, isn't that ironic that I'm here today? So I went from Gustavus to the University of Michigan, one of the best law schools in the country. It was the best one I got into. And almost immediately started going down 2 paths that are quite different, but both at the same time. University of Michigan was an excellent traditional legal education. And at the very same time, I was also working almost full-time at Washtenaw County Legal Aid. One of the years there, the family law section that I was part of handled 17% of the divorces in Washtenaw County. So I was working hard, serving poor people, and getting a top-notch legal education at the very same time. So that started me off on my path. I followed that with 25 years in legal services. And I like to think, and people tell me I can think this, that I spent 25 years doing excellent legal work on behalf of the most disadvantaged people around. It was a time of a terribly high caseload. Most years I handled 200 cases or more at a time. I would like to be able to tell you how many cases I handled in 20 years at Legal Aid in Polk County, but I can't. There's no way that Iowa Courts Online counts that number of cases. I think it's safe to say I've handled as many cases or more than almost anybody, and all for individual people. We served at Legal Aid in Polk County at a time when money was tight, legal services budgets were going down. I did serve in a management role there. I was the supervising attorney of the family law unit for the entire almost 21 years that I was there. Assistant director for the last 12 years that I was there. But chiefly what I did is I represented people, individuals with the worst possible problems. I summarize it as I was a specialist in drug, sex, and violence. Because the screening process was that in order to qualify for legal services, a person had to have either really bad luck or really poor skills. So the initial screening was difficult. Then we had priorities for the difficult cases that really needed to have attorneys. And then because I was the senior attorney, I got the really worst ones that nobody else ever wanted to touch. And I did a lot of trials. Immediately following that, I turned around and did something that appears on the surface to be the opposite. Went into private practice, going from legal services where it's federally prohibited to have any legislative contact with anyone except with an engraved invitation. I turned around and went to a law firm that does a lot of legislative work. It really wasn't terribly different in terms of the cases that I handled, although I got a much wider exposure and went from handling the most disadvantaged people in the community to some of the most rich and powerful people in the community. And of course, I also ended up doing a lot of legislative work because I've been the legislative chairperson for the family law section of the Iowa State Bar for most of the time that I've been in private practice. But the experience in private practice has also given me different opportunities. I've become a mediator, mediate difficult cases, custody, child support, visitation cases. Became a parenting coordinator to intervene, sometimes almost in the role of a private judge in very difficult situations with high conflict parents. I've represented children and I've taught a lot of continuing legal education classes. And I have done a lot of work with legislation. The other day, Tuesday morning, for example, first thing I did is I went to a school and talked to a little girl about a termination of parental rights. And then I went straight to the legislature to talk to them about, to talk to a subcommittee about an amendment to a law that we worked on last year. The law last year was to give the deployed service member the ability to delegate visitation time if they're deployed to a family member. And that left out, what if the deployed person has joint physical care? Can they delegate that? And so we went to talk about that. And I think a perspective that I've gotten from doing that legislative work is important because I see close up how laws are made, and it's not necessarily a pretty process. At the same time that I was in the last few years at Legal Aid and the whole time I've been in private practice, I've done something else that you may have read about. The lawyer by day, and I say lunatic by night. They said something else. But in the past 15 years, continuously, I've been raising children. Didn't give birth to a single one, but I've been raising children. And my daily life is with these kids. And they have given me experiences I could have never imagined, because these are kids who are affected by homelessness, by abuse, by mental illness, by their parents being in prison, by their parents being deported. But on the other hand, it's not just tragic issues, which may be out of the mainstream, but also, for example, this morning at 7:45, 15 minutes after we're supposed to be in the car on the way to school, I've got an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old laying in the hall outside the bathroom. She's rapidly painting in the map that he is drawing for his homework, which is due first thing in the morning. That's real life. My qualifications that I bring to you are that I believe I have a high quality of legal practice. I think I have some additional perspectives about legislation and about families that are unusual. And I have to tell you, I live where people live, the good and the bad and the ugly, the day-to-day life. Thank you for your time. I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Ms. Dornburg, we appreciate your comments, and we'll start on this side of the table. Ms. Redenbach?
Ms. Dornburg, thank you, and thanks for your application. I enjoyed our interview earlier. I have read your article, and I know that one summer my husband and I just had 2 exchange students from Germany that added to the dynamics of our family, making it 6 people in the home instead of 4. And even that, although it was a wonderful experience for all of us, presented itself with its own challenges. And so I would like you to, again, you alluded to some of that in your opening statement, but I see that will help you with collegiality and consensus, but what else do you think, or how do you think that those experiences will enhance your contribution to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it's because the public face of the Supreme Court that I would bring would be a woman, for one thing, and somebody who has children with clear responsibilities for the children, and also an understanding right on the front lines of how difficult day-to-day life is for regular people. I think that if anything, the criticisms that I've heard about the court, to some extent, is about it being elitist and in an ivory tower, and I don't think anybody could claim that I live in an ivory tower.
Mr. Brody?
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. First, I wanted to say, obviously, you've done a very good job with your children because you foster teamwork between the 2 of them. I don't think my children would have done the same at that age. So one of them would have just smirked at the other and walked on down the hallway. So given your work over the last 10 years, then you commented on your work up on the Hill here. Given the budget issues and the other challenges that the Iowa court has, what insights would you offer to the court on how to work across the street on the Hill?
Let me be clear that I have not been a lobbyist. I've just been a legislative chairperson. But I do understand the necessity for making face-to-face contact and being able to explain your case to the legislators, and being able to find common interests with the legislators, being able to understand what constituency they represent and be able to explain our position on whatever issue in terms that make sense to those legislators who are there thinking about what their constituents want. Just the whole communication process, I think, of how to plead your case in terms that the listener understands instead of just in terms that we understand when we're making the proposal for the legislation.
Thank you.
Ms. Skogerson?
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Dornburg. I want to thank you for your application, but also thank you in particular for your service to the Family Law section of the Bar Association. I don't know what our section would do without you. I guess I kind of have 2 questions if you just address each briefly. One, I would, if you would talk with the commission about your familiarity with other areas of law besides family law and how maybe your practice and experience have touched upon other areas of the law. And then also if you would just very briefly describe the animal of what a parenting coordinator does and how that might lend itself to collegiality on the court.
Sure. Well, during the time at Legal Aid, I spent 1 year doing all administrative law. And the entire time, well, from the time we started doing intake as a specific intake function, all of the lawyers took turns screening all of the cases that came in. And so we all had to have a working knowledge of what cases were coming in the front door. I always like family law because because it opens into all kinds of other areas of the law. And I also like to think that receiving that really traditional legal education gave me the framework for analyzing any kind of situation. I look forward to thinking about something other than family law by needing to educate myself about some areas if I were on the court, and I know that that would be necessary. A parenting coordinator is sort of a combined role of a mediator and an arbitrator and a parent educator and a counselor, and it takes some special training to do that because it's a parenting coordinator comes into the case after the final decree. You don't want a parenting coordinator changing the dynamics before you have a trial, for example. But after the custody is established, then the parenting coordinator works with the family, meets with them as necessary. I require that the court order that appoints me as a parenting coordinator specifies the authority that I have to make decisions in particular areas, such as who can pick up or drop off kids for visitation, how to coordinate rules that have to do with cell phones and homework between the two homes, a whole variety of things. And then there's another category that is specified in the order that would appoint me, which would say what things I can make recommendations about, and typically definitely can't change anything that's in the court's specific jurisdiction, like custody or child support amount, but can make recommendations about amounts of time, that sort of thing. Sometimes I actually convened a hearing because my appointment was as a special master. I convened a hearing to receive evidence from the various people about a visitation schedule. And they reached an agreement midway through, so technically the hearing is suspended until we go back. So we can either settle the case or I finish up the hearing and make a ruling then. And the court order that appointed me as a special master in that case provides that I can make binding orders about that. With the change in the rules of judicial conduct last year, some of those rules apply to me, so it's been a little complicated because I started out as a special master, intending that to be a parenting coordinator, but midway through the rules change and I'm called a special master, so I have to be careful what I do so I don't run afoul of the rules of judicial conduct.
Any other questions on this side? Any questions on this side? Professor Cochran?
Ms. Dornburg, thanks for your application. You mentioned in your opening statement the shift from representing some of our most vulnerable citizens to working with some of our most, some of our most privileged citizens. How effective a job do you think our legal system in Iowa does in delivering equal justice to both these kinds of populations? And if we need to do better, how might we do better?
Well, my experience was that it was a great experience. To me, that's the rule of law, that I can go into court with the most disadvantaged person and they get equal justice with everybody else. And I can go into court with the most privileged person and they get equal justice like everybody else. And it was quite a surprise to the disadvantaged person that they would get equal justice like everybody else, and it was sometimes quite a shock to the very advantaged person that they got justice just like everybody else. With legal services for poor people having funding problems, I think that it becomes a more critical issue, and I worry about that.
Well, as informed with all week, I think Mr. Cook's going to get the last word here.
Thank you, Justice Wiggins, and thank you for chairing this process. You've done an excellent job. Thank you for applying. You have an impressive background, went to one of the top law schools in the country and could have parlayed into a very lucrative position in a major law firm, and you chose legal aid. That says a lot about your character. we're all here, and we've been here this week because of the retention vote, and that came after the Varnum decision. And you've spent 10 years as legislative chair of the Family and Juvenile Law section of the Bar Association, which deals with marriage issues. The Varnum decision, which is sometimes referred to as the gay marriage decision, but could also be referred to as the equal protection for all decision. Do you have any observations you'd like to share with us about that case?
Well, the first observation is that the justices followed the law. Regardless of what their personal opinions may have been, they followed the law. My observation about that case is informed by the fact that I live and work in communities where same-sex couples have been able to enjoy marriage benefits. They're my neighbors and my friends. And how this impacts where we are here in this room on this day is that I think that the emotions about that case got combined with a lack of understanding about how judges make decisions in general, and that got focused on how judges are picked, and the whole thing got pushed together into a sort of a toxic ball that we as a bar and the court probably did not see coming, and we probably did not explain the case well enough. I take some responsibility for that. I was supposed to figure out some way to help educate the public and lawyers about that case, and it was very difficult to figure out how to do that. I think that we were kind of late to the game. Once for Fair and Impartial Courts was developed, I did some speaking for that. The bar didn't take a position on whether judges should be retained or not until the very last minute, less than 3 weeks before the election. You know, when I gave the speeches, I said not a single person has been forced to marry a person of their own sex if they didn't want to. And not a single church has been forced to marry any two people that they didn't want to. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. I think it was probably exploited for political reasons. And I think it's very sad.
Thank you for your application. Thank you.
Ms. Dornburg, we thank you very much for making your application and wish you good luck.